Yes, hi, I'm Katie Poole, and I just have a few welcome comments I want to make to this fantastic group. So I'm co-chair of the Open Book Program, which is part of the Pasadena Literary Alliance. We're presented by the Pasadena Literary Alliance, and so welcome everybody tonight. So our group, we do three things. We celebrate authors. We discuss books amongst ourselves, and then we also raise money for literary initiatives in, I refer to the San Gabriel Valley area, sort of local initiatives, and we are at this point well over $500,000 in returning these donations, your donations to our grantees. We have 6 grantees this year. We've added a grantee, which is the Altadena Library. So we just want to tell you how proud we are for that. Yeah. So the other thing I want to mention is that we are not affiliated with any other institution. We're not part of a university or a church. It's just our group of volunteers. And at this point, I'd like all the volunteers to raise their hands because you are surrounded. You have quite a few volunteers. We always love new volunteers, so if you are interested, just tap somebody on the shoulder and ask them what they do, and they'll tell you about the job they had this year and what that was like. And then if you want in-depth information, there is a flyer in the lobby with our website on it, and there's 3 reasons. I like things in threes. There's 3 reasons to go to the website. One is that, what is it?
Donate, that's a good idea. You
No,
can donate.
it's that we have all our videos.
Right.
So we have videos of most of our performances online. They're free, you can watch them. The second thing is that there's an opportunity to donate. If you, for example, if you were brought here by a friend and you didn't have a chance to donate, then you can do that on the website. Okay, the third thing is that we are a roving band of literary enthusiasts, and we are in all these different eccentric locations in Pasadena. So if you give us your email, then we can tell you where we're going to be next fall. So Open Book is a traveling group. And so to that point, I want to thank Heidi Sandoval, who's here somewhere. Because, we jumped at the chance to be at the Doheny Institute. You are in an institute which is it's the most advanced ocular treatment and research center in the world, and you are in this building. So that's so fun. Heidi, thank you. And also I'd like to say that the Doheny family, the people who have been involved here, have been so supportive of having a new group of people come in through the doors, and they really are a treasure here in Pasadena. Okay, just a couple more things I want to say. The other thing is that we had the sponsor for this event to provide the refreshments, which were all the alcohol and the nuts and everything else, and that was Jones Coffee. So here's the thing about Jones Coffee. Like, I was talking to Chuck Jones, and I want to advertise the coffee. By the way, he has bags of beans out there for everybody, so take those home with you. But he said, what I really want to advertise is the fact that now Jones Coffee is open at night as a wine store. So if you haven't been in there, I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, so certain nights of the week. They have a fantastic wine tasting program there, which my husband and I tried out. So thank you to Jones Coffee.
Is that in Altadena, Katie?
Really appreciate that. Jones Coffee is on Raymond. Thank you for asking that.
And also on Mission in South Pass.
And also on Mission in South Pass, but I don't know where the wine is.
It's
That's where the question was. And the name of the wine store is called the Crush Pad. So look it up. Go to the Crush Pad. Okay. So now let me briefly introduce our authors.
Fabulous dresses.
So I just want to say that the special sauce of the open book program is bringing together the authors that we want to hear talk to each other. So tonight is one of those nights. Both of these authors zero in on complex family relationships. Both Claire and Michelle famously tackle, and this is me saying this, that impossible dialogue between parents and adult children. They capture that so beautifully, and I have an adult child in the audience, and I'm just saying. That's impossible to capture. Claire Lombardo's debut novel, The Most Fun We Ever Had, came out in June of 2019 and catapulted to the New York Times bestseller list. It's being adapted as a series to be produced by Laura Dern and Amy Adams. And more importantly, written by Claire. So we have to hear about that.
Oh, thank you.
Claire followed that up with Same as It Ever Was. So that book came out exactly a year ago, a national bestseller. It was named a best book by People and Parade magazine. Fantastic, and this is sort of the one-year birthday of that book. So both books are on sale tonight at the Vroman's table. All proceeds go to Vroman's. So if you haven't, read them, be sure to pick them up and Claire will be able to sign it afterwards. So I always like to add one detail about an author that you don't know. So, yeah. Well, you may not have known that Claire has worked as a social worker.
Oh.
We consider that a great start for a novelist and who explores the human condition. Claire was born and raised in Illinois and travels to us from her home in Iowa City. Claire earned her MFA in fiction at the Iowa Writers Workshop and currently teaches fiction writing. So, a couple words about Michelle. Michelle Huneven is our own Pasadena celebrity. Her last novel, Search, which was set in Pasadena, introduced us to endearing characters on a church search committee tasked with finding a new minister. Moments of heaven and hell abound, all in familiar environs that are fun for us to spot. Also, I just want to mention that Michelle was with the Pasadena Festival of Women Authors in 2012. Okay, so fantastic. What you may not know about Michelle is, and it must be said, that Michelle is experiencing firsthand the tragedy of our Eden fire. Michelle lost her own home and her rental home in Altadena just a few months ago. Yet, when we talked to her, she was committed and game to talk tonight about her new novel, Bug Hollow. So, even more fun, today is the publication date for Bug Hollow, and tonight is the night to get the new book signed. So, Bug Hollow has received a lot of acclaim. It's on a long list of must-read this summer book lists, including the New York Times Summer Reading Pick and Oprah's Best Summer Reads of 2025. But also, I heard that on the internet, that this weekend, that you got a great review from the New York Times.
Sure.
It hasn't come out on paper yet, but I'll believe it when I see it in the newspaper. So, okay, our authors opted to not have a moderator or interviewer tonight, so this will definitely be a high-wire act. And we'll have time for questions. Joni is going to give you a little sign when there's 5 minutes. So please welcome Claire Lombardo and Michelle Huneven.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks for the Pasadena Literary Alliance and Open Book. When I was at the Women's Literary Festival, it's such a class act. It's so professionally done, which is not always the case when writers are asked to do things. That when Betsy,
Do you want to use that mic?
sure, when
No,
Betsy.
that's better.
Rich came to me and asked me if I would do this, I said absolutely, just because the Literary Alliance is just such a beautifully run program. So very happy to be here, especially with Claire.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here too. I love this book so much, and it's an honor to be here on its birthday. So thanks for having me.
And likewise for the birthday of your book.
Thank you.
See, we're women. We're just going to be nice
We're
the
just
whole
going
time.
to compliment each other back and forth
Yes.
for an hour.
Yes.
So are you going to read for us?
Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit of a sad passage, but I chose it because it takes us all over Altadena and Pasadena, and I thought that people might like to travel with me. A couple things you have to know, because it's on page 60 of the book. You have to know that the Samuelson family has lost their oldest son, Ellis. It's not really a spoiler because it's right there on the book cover. You'll know it before you read the book. And this is a story called The Teacher, and it focuses on his mother, Sybil. And she's not talking to an adult child in this. She's talking to her 8 or 9-year-old daughter, Sally. They're shopping. There's also, I guess, the other thing you have to know is that there's an older daughter named Katie. On Saturday mornings, Sib does the week's shopping. At the door, she calls, without urgency, "Girls, I'm going out now. Anyone coming with?" These days, only Sally ever does. Sib dislikes supermarkets, the shivering fluorescent light, the long aisles and crowded shelves, the endless choices. So she makes a round of smaller stores. First, Preble's, the fancy produce market in a chilly warehouse where fruits and vegetables are still in their field crates. Then the cheerful butchers on Lake Avenue, the little Armenian market with the best coffee, and finally, the Italian market for lunch meat and noodles. Today at Preble's, Sally wants Sib to buy purple potatoes. "Let's have them with corn and carrots. It will be so pretty," she says. Sib, amused, thinks, "Who is this person?" and buys a pound. Sally has always loved food, especially strong tastes. As a toddler, she devoured olives and pickles. At 18 months, she once ate a whole jar of mustard. Phil, that's her dad, and Sib had watched, curious to see how far she'd go. In the Armenian store, Sally begs for the lamajun covered with za'atar, and at the Italian store, when the counterman gives her a sliver of hard cheese with peppercorns in it, she wants Sib to buy some of that, too. At almost 9, Sally's becoming long-waisted and skinny, like Ellis was. Too bad she doesn't have his thick, curly, corn-yellow hair. Hers is a lackluster dishwater blonde, so fine and flyaway that even the smallest rubber bands slip out of it. And it snarls horribly, especially during the night. The knots sometimes so dense, Sib has to cut them out. But Sally insists on keeping her hair long and only agreed to a pixie cut once after a disastrous home perm. Remember those? Sib had carefully layered the plastic rollers, a headache given the spiderweb nature of Sally's hair, until bored and irritated at how long it was taking, she stopped being so meticulous. Predictably, one side came out a fuzzball with the other barely waved. Sally let the hairdresser cut it short, but in the car home, she'd sobbed into her fingers. That was before they really had something to cry about. After they finished their rounds, Sib drives up into the San Rafael Hills to look at the houses for sale. With well-groomed yards and winding streets, San Rafael is a neighborhood Sib could happily live in. Phil won't even discuss moving, let alone go house hunting with her. She and Sally have a game. They stop at for sale signs, and if there are flyers, Sally will dash out and take one. Sib will ask the number of bedrooms and the square footage, then guess the price. If she's within $5,000, Sally will say, "You win, Mom." Otherwise, "Close, Mom," or "Way, way off, Mom." This is 1974, by the way. Phil doesn't want to move because he designed and built their home on El Pájaro Street. He was building it when Sib met him almost 20 years ago. That was part of what charmed her. He had done engineering work for the architect Gregory Ain, who built a street of modernist houses. Phil had loved those houses so much. I get verklempt because they all burned down. He loved those houses so much, he designed one for himself using Ain's signature elements: open kitchens, clear stories, white rock roofs. Sib, too, loved the house and its large lot subdivided from a lemon grove. Phil's mother lived around the corner then, and Sib loved her as well. The two women had coffee every afternoon when the kids were young, coffee with a dunk of something. They talked and laughed and watched the kids play. They never ran out of things to talk about. But Phil's mother has been dead for 3 years, and now, since Ellis's accident, the whole neighborhood seems dingy with sadness. Sib wants someplace new and different, perhaps this half-timbered cottage with a hard-pruned rose garden. Sally bolts out and grabs a flyer from a sheaf on the for sale sign. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 1,870 square feet, she says, climbing back into the car. Is there a pool? No. Let me think, Sib says. 62,000. You win, Mom, 64,000. On the few miles home to Altadena, the silence between the two starts to thrum. Sib is about at the limit of what she can take of the girl. Those big eyes, exaggerated by her glasses, are so woozy and beseeching, they make Sib shrink back. Sib knows, they both know, that this is the time for her to check in, to ask how her daughter's doing. But Sib can't, she won't, she doesn't have it in her, whatever it is. She's all but holding her breath until they can go their separate ways. With both her girls now, she's at a loss. Sally, so odd and plain, gets too close, and Katie pushes Sib away. Sib loves them, she does, too much, and yet alone with either one, she wants to hide behind a stone wall. Aren't we getting milk, Sally says. Sib has lost track and passed the drive-through dairy, their usual last stop. I'll send Dad out later, she says. I've got to get back. I have a lot of work to do. Really, another minute in this car and she'll explode. She needs her Hawaiian punch with a thimble-sized spike, or, since it's Saturday, a 2-thimble spike before tea later at Mrs. Wright's. And please don't whine, Sally, she says. I wasn't whining, I just asked. Well, you're whining now, so cut it out, okay? The girl turns away from her and looks out the passenger side window. At the nape of her neck is a big rat's nest where her hair is rubbed against her collar. You know, Sal, if you can't keep your hair combed, Sib says, we'll have to cut it short again. Mom, sorry. Wait with bated breath for the conclusion. Sorry about that. Mom, Sally calls out, but she is crying, so it comes out, Mob. Oh, for God's sake, Sib says, but that is all she says, because she too has begun to weep.
Thank you, that was lovely. That makes me want to ask you about 15 different things. But because you chose such a sort of local passage, do you want to talk a little bit about place in your fiction and writing about Altadena, being from there, and reading about it now?
I will. I've placed all my books in Southern California. But after I wrote my 4th novel, which took place in the Southern Sierras, I decided no more. From here on out, it's Altadena all the way. I've always identified as a regional writer, and Altadena is so rich that I just thought, this is what I'm going to write about.
Yeah. And do you get a lot of readers? This is a leading question because I get a lot of these strange emails. People like to see the place that they're from show up in a book that they're reading. Have you gotten any unusual missives from readers, or is it all just sort of joyful?
Oh, some readers like to point out what you've done wrong.
Yeah, that was what I was
That's very popular. The gotcha readers.
Yeah.
But I want to hear about yours, though.
Oh, I once had a woman tell me that I had written the less efficient route to the airport, to O'Hare. This very long email. And then I stopped making my email address public. But yeah, people, it's sort of a mixed bag because it's always exciting for me to see a place I recognize, but then it's also,
Yeah.
you get the other side of that as well.
Well, I was in a book club once, and it was a small book club. I was doing it on Zoom, and one by one they came up and asked something or said something, and one woman came up and said, "I see that you had the California Conservation Corps in your novel," and I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "It's the civilian Conservation Corps," and I said, "Well, I think there was a California Conservation Corps." And she said, "Nope, I checked." Same sort of
The
thing.
proudest moment of her life.
Yes.
Sure.
But I always tell my students, you've got to be accurate because there are people who will disregard everything else you've done for that one thing that they can catch you on.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pivot a little bit, I guess, to talking about humor, which is what I was thinking about when you were reading. There are so many moments in this novel when you so spot on sort of describe the dynamics between parents and children or in a marriage in a really humorous way, and then the next sentence just sort of gut punches you. Does that come naturally to you, the sort of relationship between comedy and tragedy, or?
Isn't that life?
Yes, right?
Yes. You know, the first time I ever read a story out loud to friends, I was done with grad school. You would think I would have done it in grad school, but I hadn't. And it was here in Pasadena at my friend Michelle Zach's house. Is Michelle here? Yeah, there she is. Hi. And T.C. Boyle and I both read a story. I read first, and people laughed. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't realized I'd written a humorous story. And that's kind of where I am today. I don't think I'm going to be funny. I just write. How about you?
I think it's sort of the same thing. I feel like you sort of have to have an innate understanding of the fact that most of life is both, often at the same time,
Often at the
or
same
in
time,
sort of
yeah.
rapid succession.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think if you're trying to be funny, it often
Yeah.
doesn't go super well. Yeah.
It's true.
And I'm thinking too about the characters in this novel, and my sympathies shifted. It felt because yours were shifting as you were writing. I'm telling you this is what was happening. I don't know for sure. Did you have a favorite character or someone that you felt the most comfortable spending time with?
Yes, but the odd thing about this book is that various people have read it, and various people choose different characters. It's almost like a Rorschach test to say who is the main character. I, of course, feel like little Sally with the, flyaway hair. I feel very close to her. Some people think Sib, the mother, is the main character, difficult, prickly, a fabulous teacher. So some people identify with that. And then some people think that Phil, the dad, who you haven't heard of, but some people see, because he kind of closes the novel, I guess, more or less. And so it's really interesting for me to hear from readers who is the main character for them.
Yeah. And speaking of Phil, one thing we have in common in our books is really nice men who are like very kind and upstanding.
Yes, it's so true.
Was that a conscious choice? Or
Yeah, pure wish fulfillment.
Yes, right? Aspirational.
Exactly. And you?
Yeah. Yes. It's the thing that I get the most. People most frequently say, that's the part I didn't buy, is that there was like a really lovely husband. They do exist. So.
And you also are very good with prickly women.
Yeah, they're my favorite kind of women.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're more fun to write, aren't they? Was Sib fun to write?
Yeah.
She's fun to read. So
Yeah.
I think it's more fun to have a character who's saying the things that you don't want them to say, or
Right. In your second novel, the woman, I mean, can you talk about writing a character who's so complex that she might put some people off? And she's the main character in the book. She's the one that everybody has to relate to.
yeah. The funny thing about that is that I didn't realize I was writing a character that would put so many people off, because I related to her quite a bit, and I liked
She's
spending.
a fabulous character.
To me, she was just sort of an utterly average person who just didn't like a lot of things, which I guess is how I would describe myself as well. But it has been interesting. I think readers hold female characters maybe to slightly different standards. So if they
Say a little more about that.
yeah, well, I mean, I think I have not been able to put my finger on what it is, but I've had readers for both of my books, but particularly the second one, say to me, I would never be like her. I would never make the choices that she makes. And this woman isn't like a suicide. I mean, she makes some questionable choices in her personal life, but don't we all? But I think that
She has a crisis.
she has a crisis, yeah, or a series of crises, yeah, which I feel like is just, like you said, it's just life.
Right.
And I think it's interesting, though. I mean, we do that in real life as well, but yeah.
But I think that one of the things we read, one of the reasons why we're so interested in shows like couples therapy is to get a glimpse at how people make mistakes and how they get themselves into trouble and how they get themselves out of trouble. There was once a 6-year-old interviewed me. She said she had to interview somebody with an interesting job, and her father having 2 physics labs in Caltech wasn't interesting enough for her. So she interviewed me as a writer, and she said, "What do you write about?" And I, at 6 years old, I said, "I write about people getting themselves into trouble and then getting themselves out of trouble."
Yeah. I always just say, I write about people, and then I run out of fuel, and then nobody wants to read my books. So that's a much better answer. And we were talking earlier about all of your books are about people getting into trouble, but they're sort of different in the worlds they inhabit. How do you know that something is interesting enough to you to pursue as a novel?
Yeah, you get an idea that won't quit.
Yeah.
But also, I have a friend, Sue Miller, who's a novelist, and she one time said to me that she likes to give herself a technical problem with each novel. And I took that to heart. And so each one of my novels, I really had something to solve. And, well, the first novel, maybe the thing to solve with the first novel is the first novel. It took me 15 years to solve that one, maybe longer. But I can remember where I am almost exactly when I get an idea for a novel. I had a dream for my second novel about waking up and a deer being in my house. And that was the inspiration for Jamesland. And then Blame, I was standing in my kitchen and I was thinking, you've been sober for all these years and you've been living this life of sobriety and generosity and whatever, the virtues that you're taught to cultivate in sobriety. And I thought, what if I found out that I wasn't a drunk after all? And I thought, oh, that's an interesting, would that life have been worth it? And then I thought, let's sweeten the deal. And what if I committed a crime, a really bad crime, and then found out, and spent all my life atoning for it, and then found out 20-some years later that maybe I didn't do it. Mm-hmm. So I remember exactly where I was standing when I had that little conversation with myself, and that was my third novel, Blame. Mm-hmm. And with Off Course, I had friends who were writing love stories, and it seemed like, oh, what a fun thing to do. And I got off the phone with my friend Mary Corey, and I thought, I'm going to write a love story too. And sorry to give you a rundown on the whole thing, but and then the
That's
fifth
what we
novel,
want. Go.
I was in a small search committee just for, I can never remember if it's an assistant or a what?
Assistant.
An assistant, thank you. It's my former minister helping me out here. An assistant minister, it was like 2 months, very easy, but the way that we evaluated people by getting these expanded resumes and meeting them on Zoom and then meeting them in person seemed very novelistic to me. And I remember filing out with other search committee members in a hallway and thinking, this could be a novel.
What about Bug Hollow? What was your moment for Bug Hollow?
I thought I'd write a series of stories.
Yeah. Can you talk a little, well, that's another, my second book also started as a story collection. Can you talk about the process of turning a bunch of stories into a novel?
And whether or not they were ever stories to begin with.
Yeah, that's
Well, I mean, one of my problems, one of the reasons why I'm not a great short story writer is that by page 3, I usually have about 36 characters. So it's much better to, have a bigger canvas. But I'd finished Search, and I didn't want to take on another big project. So I thought, I'll write some short stories. But I didn't have any ideas. So I started writing to prompts. I had a whole bunch of prompts, and I wrote to them for 43 days. Every day I'd wake up and I'd set the timer for 20 minutes and I'd write to a prompt. And one of the prompts I'd actually written to before, and the prompt was, write about a sibling that you never had. I give that to my students because it's familiar, all the characters are familiar to them and they only have to invent one character. And that helps them, and I'd like that prompt, and I'd written this story, Bug Hollow, up to a certain point, but I could never get it quite to the finish line. But I took it out and I finished it. And then I gave it to my friend and first reader, the novelist Mona Simpson, to read, and she said, well, now I'd like to know about the girlfriend that Ellis left behind. So I wrote Julia at 20, which was a short story. And then she said, now I'd like to know about the mother. So it was a series of prompts. I told my friend I was writing about an engineer. The dad was an engineer working at Parsons who sometimes went to Saudi Arabia. And she said, well, he should have an affair in Saudi Arabia. And I said, but he's a nice guy. But I wrote the story. So Bug Hollow sold to the Story Quarterly, and then I began to send out the other ones, and they just were coming back to me 8 months later. Try to sell a story today, it's really hard. And they were rejected. And I think that part of the reason they were rejected is that they weren't really freestanding enough. So when I had 7 of them, I sent them to my agent to send to my editor because I wanted my editor's advice on, should I keep trying to write these freestanding stories or what should I do? And they came back with no answer but an offer. So that was really sweet. And then because I think short stories don't really sell, they said, you're writing a novel, Michelle. So the only thing I really had to do was to change some of the point of view. Some of them were written in the first person, and my editor wanted me to put them in the third person. So
yeah. That's fascinating. So the stories, as you sat down to write them, do they appear in the order that you wrote them in this now novel?
Until the last 3.
Okay.
And the last 3 stories I wrote were JP, 23 and JP, and then I wrote remembering and repeating and remembering and repeating, and then Phil, the last one.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're pretty chronological.
Wow. And how long did this book take you to write? Can I ask you that? I hate when people ask
Just
me
about
that.
a year.
Okay, that's insane.
How long did my first novel take? 15 years. How long did Search take? 3.5 years.
So does that mean it gets easier?
Well, it helps when you don't think you're writing a novel,
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
psych yourself out.
You trick yourself.
No, the other thing I did is that I read somewhere that Alice Munro wrote a short story a month, and in a month, and her stories are like mini novels. I mean, they're incredible. And I thought, wow. So I was going to try to write a story in a month without aspiring to be half as dense and
Yeah.
sophisticated as her writing.
Wow.
So it was sort of fun. There were prompts and pressure.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I want to talk to you later about the prompts that you use because I might need some. I would like to pivot to talk about my very favorite thing in the world to talk about, which is dogs. There is a dog in this novel named Hinky who is a
Manchester Terrier.
Yes.
Manchester Terrier.
And I looked that up the first time I saw it, and so I had a picture in my head. Dogs are hard to write in fiction, and they're hard to, it's hard to have a dog in a novel that resonates, and Hinky has stuck with me. I mean, because I'm obsessed with dogs, but he's a very
Yes.
good fictional dog. Can you talk about writing this dog?
Well, when I lived in Atwater Village, there was a dog that lived on the corner of my street. And this dog was a Manchester Terrier. They're about this high, and they have, they're black with little brown dots on
Yeah.
their. And this dog would be standing in a group of people, and whenever somebody would talk, the dog would look to whoever was talking. It was the most alert dog I knew. And so add to that, I met a guy once whose girlfriend claimed that he wasn't raised by his parents, that he was raised by his boxer. And she had this whole list of the traits that the boxer had that he had. And so I thought it'd be really fun to give, at one point, Phil keeps swerving to look at people, and his lover says, you move your head around like that. And he says, oh, sorry, I got it from my dog. Because, they're a big part of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
They train us.
They do. And the dog in this novel plays such an important role in this family and is sort of uniquely important to each member of this family who doesn't always communicate super well.
Yeah.
So can you talk about writing this is your first sort of quote unquote family novel. Can you talk about what drew you to that?
Yeah. And then you have to talk about writing your family novel too.
Okay.
When I was at the workshop, everybody was writing these very profound, the writer's workshop when I was in my 20s, everybody was writing family stories. And I thought, I can't write one, my family's not interesting. So, it took, 30 years of therapy and distance to realize that my family was actually full of material. I always wrote about found families, about people that were kind of loners and full of foibles and a little bit misbegotten maybe, that found each other and made community. That's sort of a continuing theme in my writing. So to actually write about a family was kind of interesting. And some of the characters are like my family, and some of them are not. Sybil is like my mother. Phil is not like my father.
Okay.
Yeah. So your first book was such a family book.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the pleasures of writing about family, and I think that this book is such a great example, is you never run out of doors to open. And this is what reading Bug Hollow felt like. You're sort of walking through a house, just sort of pushing open different doors and finding new people. But I think that is the pleasure, is that you have all of these people who are essentially trapped in a house together for decades.
Yeah.
And weird stuff is going to happen inevitably that might not seem weird to them, and that makes it even more interesting. But
Well, how did you decide to start with a family novel?
I started with a single character with one of the sisters.
Which ones?
Violet, who
Uh-huh.
ended up being the character I was the least interested in. But and then as I was writing about her, I was like, oh, she has a sister, and the sister's kind of fun to spend time with, and oh, she has these parents who are always like making out in the pantry, and that's sort of interesting to me. And
They're really great.
yeah, it's just sort of I'm not a very plot-driven writer, and so I sort of love that you can have all of these characters in a space and just the way that they interact with each
Make
other.
them cook.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or put them in a car together. That's a good lock your characters in a car and send them, because they can't jump out, and
Exactly.
who knows what could happen. Yeah.
I'm told now we have to take some questions from the audience.
Great.
You have 5 more minutes.
Oh, we
Oh.
have 5 more minutes. Oh, okay.
Uh-oh, the pressure's
Well,
on.
that's actually an exercise I give my students.
Ooh, okay.
For dialogue, I said, put them in a closed space and have them talk about an emergency without saying what the emergency is.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's a good one.
Yeah. So we both went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Do you
Yes,
have a
we did.
piece of advice that you got as a student that you still sort of parrot to your students today, or that you still...
It's the same one that so many people parrot, which is your student or your colleagues are your community, and they're the ones who are going to change your life. It's not the editor that comes through. It's not your famous teacher. It's your friends that are going to take you along, and they'll be your writing companions. Did you find that that's true too?
Sort of. I think it depends on when you were there. Sometimes we're more competitive I have so many lovely friends who I don't exchange work with, but who are incredibly important to me and dear to me, and who you can talk to about really granular, boring things that no one else will.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
no, I think that the workshop, which is sort of famous and high profile, when I taught there, my students finally admitted that they were just terrified. Yeah, and
Is
that's-
anyone not? Yeah, I would be very suspicious of anyone who's not.
Yeah, but then you end up, I remember I had this one office mate in Iowa who I loathed. He was mean, he was awful, and he was in workshop with me and he said horrible things about my writing. And then I moved out to LA, and I guess we didn't have text then, I got a letter from him saying, I'm in LA, you want to get together? And we did, and he was the nicest person. And it was like, what was that about in Iowa? And he just said, we're just all scared to death that somebody was going to get something that we weren't going to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. I guess that does bring out the worst.
And when I went back and taught there, I had 12 students in my first workshop, and every single one of them was insanely talented. And yet you knew that some of them were going to get published, and some of them were just too out there or just not quite gonna do it. And it's a really interesting hot pot.
It is. It's a frightening one at times, but lots of interesting minds.
Shall we open it up?
Somebody is meant to be doing questions.
Sue Horton, somebody is going to bring you a,
Okay. Surely some of you have some questions you would like to ask these lovely ladies.
Got one right.
Here we go.
So I think you both are very interested in and write very well about sibling relationships. And I'm just curious to hear why siblings are so interesting and how they work literally.
One thing comes to mind. Margot Livesey, who was a teacher of mine, once said that we're so drawn to families in fiction because you never have to justify why they're there. So if you have someone's weird boyfriend, you have to explain how they met and how he came to stick around. But your siblings, you don't get to choose, and you just have to live with them for a really long time and then have them in your life for a really long time after that. And I find that really interesting. And I come from a big family. Michelle and I were talking about our respective sisters earlier. It's a sort of unique I don't know what you would call it, but it's sort of those dynamics. It's that sensation again of something you can't get away from, and that's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's true. Like in one sense, my sister and I have very little in common, and in another sense, we have this shared memory of growing up in the same house with the same people. So it's the attachment is there,
Yeah.
even if you don't really get along or have a lot to relate to. It's your unchosen family.
Got some over here.
So you're thinking about moving to a different medium. You're going to be doing something in terms of television or whatever. And what is the challenge? What's been significant about moving from one medium to working now in a different kind of medium?
Yeah, so my pilot died a while ago. My television pilot died, not my like plane pilot. But I did, I shifted to television writing a few years ago. And I think the thing I found really interesting about writing for TV, I love writing dialogue. You write great dialogue, and I would imagine take pleasure in it because it's so fun to read. With television, this sounds simplistic, but all you have is dialogue to lean on, which does present some challenges, which I love. I love any kind of constraint that's given to me when I'm writing. So I found that fun, and I think it strengthened. Yeah.
Will you do it again, do you think?
I don't know. I don't know if there's any television writer. I don't know how people can commit their lives to writing something and then it just goes away.
Yeah.
I know that that's how a lot of television writers operate, and I commend them, but I'm sort of sensitive.
Yeah, we like the object,
Yes,
the objet, yes.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
I'm interested in the writing process in terms of a novel. So when you're putting your novels together, how do you think about how much needs to happen in this novel versus how much do you need to explain the context that the novel is in versus how much the characters need to develop versus, I don't know, that just to me,
Yeah.
the problem with writing a novel or embarking upon such a project, which I've considered, it's so overwhelming to me, and I'm just interested in how you think about it. I've heard it also, comes out organically, but.
Yeah. Please.
Well, Nabokov says that writing a novel is like driving in a car with about 5 feet of visibility in the fog.
Yeah.
And, we're patterning creatures. We make patterns whether we're conscious of them or not. Like somebody had to point out to me that there are 2 adopted children in my novel, one in the first half of the novel and one in the second half of the novel. I never thought about it that way, that it was a balance or a pattern. It just came out. And so you have to trust that a little bit. You learn to trust that. You learn to trust whatever that's generative inside of you. I often read stuff I write and I don't know who wrote it. I'll find these, yellow legal pads sitting around my office, and it's like, I don't have any memory of writing it. It's, you just have to trust that it's going to come out to some degree.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I am often surprised by things that my editor or that readers identify in my writing, and I'm like, oh, that was sort of smart. I didn't intend it, but it doesn't happen very often. But I think it's a balance of that sort of like manic generative part, which often takes years, and then you sort of have to put Alan Gurganis said once that you have to. You have to be a mad scientist for the first half, and then like an academic with bifocals for the second half, and sort of get in and do all of the mechanical stuff, which I have a lot of fun with. The sort of figuring out, like looking at the anatomy of a novel and looking at kind of what you've actually done, which often I don't remember either. Yeah.
And you just kind of have to do it, because if you think about it too hard, you won't. There's one there. And then one back there.
Well, so I have a two-part question. One is, and part of it, Michelle, is because I'm sitting next to Tilly, is given who you write about, especially given the email that you're talking about from a stranger, how have you dealt with people in your real life, siblings, what have you, that said, is that me? And who's me? And that. And my second question is, as with teachers and in this community, who are you surprised isn't getting reviewed by the New York Times? Is there an author that you love right now or you're so interested in that we all should be reading and thinking about?
So that's your two-part question. One is what to do with people who recognize themselves in your writing. Is that what you're asking?
Or they think that it might,
Yeah.
I might think it's me because I have a large sense of self and it's not.
Exactly.
That's right. The woman at the grocery store that's like, I've never said that to you, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wrote about sisters. Did your sisters have any identification with them?
They sure did, yes. That is part of the reason I have an interesting relationship with. No, I gave my first book to one of my sisters very early, and she read it, and she called me, and she said, "This isn't about our family." And I was like, I know that was the point. So I thought I was safe, and then I wasn't. But I do think people are more apt to identify themselves when you didn't intend for them to. Has that happened to you? Yeah.
Well, when I wrote Search, I needed 17 Unitarian Universalist ministers, and I knew about 4.
Yeah.
And so I very meticulously made them up. I would go to seminary syllabi and read class descriptions and think, who would take this class and take it seriously? Who would take a theological dance class? You know, that sort of thing, and what kind of a person would that be? And I had these dossiers for 17 different ministers.
Wow.
And the first book group I talked to was a UU group, and they said, we've identified all of your ministers. So yeah, that happens. And then what was her second half?
Who is not being reviewed in the New York Times, who we would like to. This is the point at which I always, I forget that I have ever in my life read a book. So I'm gonna let you go first.
Or student, because Michelle, when you said I'm in a classroom and I see these students and they're all brilliant. I heard an interview with, I think it was S.A. Crosby, and he was talking about, there's so many great writers out there and sometimes you get a shout out. So
Yeah.
as two wonderful, amazing writers, who would you say, oh, I found this book and I loved it?
Well, my Iowa students are more mainstream now than I am. Tony Tula-Tamuti, Tony Mara, Carmen Machado, they've all made huge hits. A book that I read recently that I loved, I don't know if you've read it, it's called Loved and Missed, M-I-S-S-E-D, by Susie Boyd, who's a British writer. It's just a beautiful, deft, heartbreaking, but hopeful book. Yeah.
Okay. I still can't think of one. One thing I'll say that I guess everyone has heard of Shirley Jackson or read The Lottery, probably. But the thing that I discovered when I was writing my first novel is that Shirley Jackson also wrote 2 motherhood memoirs. Before that was sort of a fashionable thing to do. And they're so funny and so, yes, yeah, she's a fabulous, Gothic writer, but then she wrote these really funny memoirs that I've given as gifts to a lot of people. So that's not a great answer. I'll think of
Well,
someone.
these are all books about
Yeah.
mothers. Susie
Yeah.
Boyd's book is about mother,
Okay.
mothering.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Hi, it's great to hear you both talking about your novels. It's really such a pleasure. So, Michelle, I have a question for you. I'm so struck when I read your work by the richness of knowledge. There's always so much about food, there's so much about architecture, there's history, there's art, there's theology, there's so much. And so I wonder, do you do research for novels, or is it just your natural, brilliance and your
Know-it-allism?
and that leads you to, and it wells up into a novel, or is it some kind of combination? And if you do research, like, what is that like?
Well, novelists, novel writing and ministry are like the last two holdouts for generalists, where you can be interested in everything and put it to work. And I am interested in a lot. I had a father who, for all of his shortcomings, was interested in everything: the names of rocks, the history of the earth, history, books, car mechanics. So I was sort of trained that you just are interested in everything. And also, as a writer, you have to kind of learn the names of everything. So sometimes I look up, what is the shape of this leaf called? Or I do research. There's a story here I mentioned that takes place in Saudi Arabia. For a few weeks, I bored everybody I knew talking about Saudi Arabian history and politics, because I just got into research rapture, which is one of the great pleasures of writing, is that you start going deep on a subject and you don't stop. You don't stop until nobody's taking your calls anymore. Do you have an answer?
Are there any further questions?
Sort of. Pardon me?
Any further questions?
Are there any further questions? Thank you, Samantha. Samantha
Thank you
Peel
to
is
both
also a
these
wonderful novelist.
accomplished authors, gifted wordsmiths, and we will have out in the lobby. There are books to be purchased, and the authors will happily sign and autograph any of them. And there are cookies and good coffee and more eats and drinks. Thank you.